Bitcoin has reclaimed $80,000. BTC priced in gold is about to print its first green monthly close after 7 red months in a row. The 4-year cycle people buried 6 months ago? Hold that thought. While everyone is staring at the price, the US government just quietly finished building the biggest piece of monetary infrastructure since 1971. And it's hidden inside a piece of crypto legislation everyone is calling a compromise. By the end of this video, you'll see the architecture being built underneath the price. You'll see why every piece of macro pressure forces the same outcome, and why the people building it have no idea they're building a massive Bitcoin distribution channel. Welcome to the most bullish setup of the year. This is Truth Block. I'm Hurley. Let's mine truth. Let's start today with the chart, because price is talking, and it's saying something quite different from what it was 2 months ago. Bitcoin is back above 80K. Bitcoin priced in gold just bounced off 7 straight red months. And on the monthly chart, Bitcoin is on track to close its first green month since the cycle high. Every time that's happened before, it's marked the end of a bear and the start of the next leg up. Now, I know we're all sick of hearing about the 4-year cycle debate, but I need to address the elephant in the room. I was loud about the 4-year cycle being dead in 2025, and I had my reasons that I don't need to rehash here. And yet, here we are, Bitcoin holding above 80K like it forgot it's supposed to be in a bear market. Plan C on X laid out the data, and it's hard to argue with. When Bitcoin enters a real extended bear market, historically it drops 77 to 93%. The mid-cycle corrections, think COVID 2020 and the China mining ban in 2021, those landed in the mid-50s. This drawdown bottomed at 50% down from the highs. That's not a bear. That's a mid-cycle correction. So is the 4-year cycle actually dead? Or did we just take the same correction Bitcoin took right before its second peak in 21?
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Here's what I love about this setup. It doesn't matter which one is right. If the cycle is dead, you get a slow grind to new highs because the new buyer base eats every dip. If the cycle is alive, you get a face-melting second peak in 2027 with a true cycle top. Both roads end at the same place. Bitcoin is going up. But the bullish case isn't really about the chart. The chart is the symptom. The setup is the new global monetary order. And this architecture is what few people outside the Bitcoin echo chamber are connecting. So let's pull back the lens a bit. Because to understand the architecture being built, you have to understand the math forcing them to build it. This week, James Lavish wrote it up cleanly in his Informationist newsletter, which I highly recommend everyone subscribe to right now. US publicly held debt just crossed 100% of GDP for the first time since 1946. The last time we sat at this number, the country was emerging from the largest war in human history. Today, there's no world war. Yet. No baby boom coming to save us. There's no manufacturing miracle on the horizon. That's the visible debt, about $39 trillion. But add in the unfunded promises, Medicare, Social Security, federal pensions, and the bill swells to $170 trillion. That's $1.3 million owed against the future for every American household. The median American family is worth $193,000. The country owes 7 times what the typical family is worth. Janet Yellen had the wheel for 4 years of that climb. She's now calling it fiscal dominance. In plain English, it means the Fed can't set rates anymore. The Treasury can't afford anything except cheap money. So the central bank serves the deficit, not the economy. The bond market knows, the gold market knows, and Bitcoin knows. So what's the way out? Ledn has been one of the clearest voices on this for years. Listen to how she frames it on the Bitcoin Archive podcast.
Well, it's up to 39 trillion now. It's going up by something like 2 trillion a year. And the short answer is there's really no way out other than default. But a country doesn't default in its local currency almost ever. And so default happens through purchasing power. It basically is a debasement that happens. And I would say it's already been happening. I mean, really ever since COVID, currency and bonds have underperformed virtually everything. And that's what happens during kind of financial repression, fiscal dominance scenarios. The biggest question, I think, is not how we get out of it, but can we get out of it in a stable way? Like, can you default and debase in such a way that you do it and then you kind of stabilize afterward? Like, for example, in the 1940s, major developed countries rapidly debased their currencies. But then when it was all kind of said and done, they then shifted toward austerity. And then they kind of grew their way out of it, combined with that devaluation, debasement, financial repression. In a much messier, more polarized environment, you're much less likely to do that. So instead of kind of, let's say in the 40s, they kind of rip the Band-Aid off, have a massive devaluation, then shift toward austerity. Instead, we're more likely in a long, kind of slow spiral, which is that it just kind of keeps debasing It's never as bad as like the sensationalists will say, or like rarely that bad. They always think it's kind of, 2 years away from blowing up entirely. And it just
Hmm.
keeps not doing that. But then it also never really corrects itself. And it takes years and potentially even decades. Like I think the current kind of fiscal spiral that the US is in is at least going to go into the 2030s. Um, and from there, I mean, after about a decade, there's not much further you can see out because all sorts of crazy stuff can happen in the course of a decade, geopolitically, militarily, nonlinear breakdowns and legal structures. But at least from a kind of an economic or macroeconomic standpoint, over the next 5, 10 years, I think it's only going to keep spiraling. And ironically, I don't think it'll be much higher public debt to GDP in the US. It'll be much higher nominal debt, much higher nominal GDP, and kind of a flat to mildly up debt to GDP. And so that kind of those fiscal deficits don't just mount into more and more debt to GDP. They instead mount in terms of increasing costs, kind of inflation that stays above the baseline. And you kind of get this K-shaped economy that we're in, where if you own assets and or if you're on the receiving side of deficits, you're generally doing pretty well. Whereas if you're on the tight side of monetary policy and or you don't own a lot of assets, you're generally struggling. And I think that's unfortunately probably going to keep widening for years to come.
A country doesn't default through its own currency. It defaults through purchasing power. The dollar in your pocket is what's defaulting. And it's been defaulting since COVID. Economists have a polite name for this play. They call it financial repression. The way it works, you cap rates below inflation, you force someone to keep holding the debt at a loss, and over the next few decades, you quietly inflate it away. America ran this play once before. From 1945 to 1974, debt to GDP went from 106% all the way down to 22%. It worked because 76 million baby boomers were walking into the workforce, because America made half the planet's industrial output, because the world had to hold dollars, and Bretton Woods made sure of that. Every one of those tailwinds is gone. So if you want to run the same play in 2026, you have to manufacture a new captive buyer of US debt out of thin air. And last week, while everyone was watching the price, 2 senators released the final compromise text on the most important crypto bill of this cycle. And almost nobody read what it actually says. On the surface, it bans yield on stablecoins. The language says no rewards functionally equivalent to interest on bank deposit. Banks declared victory. Headlines moved on. But if you read the second half, it says actively based rewards for payments, remittances, and lending are explicitly permitted. And those rewards can still be calculated on balance and duration. That's just interest with a different name. So why does this matter? Because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has publicly named a $3.7 trillion stablecoin issuance target. Without that yield carve-out, dollar stablecoins offer nothing a bank account in a developed market doesn't already offer, which means the flywheel never spins up, and Bessent's target dies on the runway. With the carve-out, every dollar stablecoin in circulation has to be backed by short-dated treasuries. The more stablecoin demand, the more T-bill demand. The more T-bill demand, the cheaper it gets to carry $39 trillion in debt. In short, they didn't compromise, they threaded a needle. And the deficit is on the other side of that needle. But the legal infrastructure only matters if the demand is there. So who actually wants a dollar stablecoin? Michael Saylor walked through this on Peter McCormick's show last week.
Well, I mean, you have the world reserve currency, the dollar, and probably with regard to that, you've got a steady 7% debasement or depreciation against scarce desirable assets that just continues to grind on. Some years it accelerates, some years it decelerates. Then you've got all of the second tier currencies pegged to the dollar. You know, if they're stable against the dollar, the pound, the euro, the yen, the Swiss franc, the DRAM, etc., when they're plus or minus 20% against the dollar oscillating, they're not as strong as the dollar. They're probably debasing just a little bit faster. And the problem is they don't have the ability to create more of their own currency. So they tend to get into currency crises or debt crises more often than not. And then that results in lurching to and fro. And then you've got the third tier currencies, and they're the ones that are losing 10% of their value against the dollar every year. And they probably run more like 14% debasement rates. And then you've got the fourth tier currencies, and those are the ones that are obviously collapsing against the dollar. And, what happens, right? The second tier countries, they just suffer from economic stagnation, bureaucratic malaise and economic stagnation. I would say in Europe, the UK, Japan, you could argue many countries, they look stable politically, but they all suffer from economic stagnation. And the third tier, everybody is struggling to simply keep their head above water, and most are failing. And the fourth tier states are all just welfare states. They're just waiting for someone from the, from the first world to go and give them something.
If you live in Argentina, Egypt, Lebanon, Nigeria, Pakistan, Saylor just described your life. You don't need a regulator's permission to know the dollar holds its value better than your local fiat. You just need a phone. That's the demand. And the activity-based rewards in the Clarity Act are designed to capture it. A Filipino remittance worker can earn a rebate on stablecoins that no bank account in the world can match. No central bank can pay balance-tied rewards without it looking like monetary policy. So no CBDC even competes with this. Dollar stablecoins win the global retail layer by default. So that's the architecture. Now I want to step back because there's something bigger going on here. Cathie Wood walked into this exact insight back in 2015, guided by a man who had no skin in the Bitcoin game.
And we wrote our first white paper on Bitcoin in collaboration with Art Laffer in 2015. And we simply were asking the question, could Bitcoin serve the three roles of money? So means of exchange, store of value, unit of account. And Art Laffer, I'm not sure if you know Laffer curve. He's famous for that in the fiscal policy arena, but he's also a monetary scholar. His mentor was Robert Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize for his monetary theory. And so we put our thesis in front of Art, and from an economic point of view, he helped us tremendously. And I have an economics background, so I began to understand Bitcoin in a profound way, because he said to me at the time, he said, this is what I've been waiting for since the U.S. closed the gold window in 1971. And I said, okay, Art, that sounds like a pretty big idea. How big could this idea be? And he said, well, how big is the U.S. monetary base? And back then, it was $4.5 trillion. Today, it's a little over $6 trillion. And Bitcoin was the equivalent, we called it network value at the time, of $6 billion in market cap. Think about that, $6 billion, and he was saying trillions. So I personally invested right away.
That was a smart move, Cathie. A supply-side monetary economist with no Bitcoin tribe to belong to looked at Bitcoin in 2015 and said, this is what I've been waiting for since 1971, since the US closed the gold window. So why does that date keep showing up? Because 1971 isn't just when Nixon broke the gold link. It's when one global monetary system died and a new one was born. And to understand the system being built right now, you have to understand the two that came before it. So Bretton Woods 1 came from 1944 to 1971. The dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. Every other major currency was pegged to the dollar. The world held dollars because dollars were essentially gold. That worked until America printed more dollars than it had gold. The deficits piled up. Foreign central banks started showing up at the gold window asking for what they were promised. Nixon closed the window in August 1971 and ended Bretton Woods 1. Bretton Woods 2 was never officially negotiated. It just emerged. Saudi Arabia agreed to price oil exclusively in dollars and recycle the proceeds into US treasuries. Other oil exporters followed. The petrodollar was born. Dollar reserve status no longer required gold backing. It required oil. And that worked for 50 years. But it's now fraying. Iran sells oil to China for yuan. India is buying Iranian oil in yuan. Ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz last month paid their tolls in Bitcoin. The petrodollar deal that ran the world from the 70s through the 2010s is on life support. So if Bretton Woods 1 was the dollar on gold, and Bretton Woods 2 was the dollar on oil, what comes next? Bretton Woods 3 is the dollar on stablecoins. It's not sovereign-to-sovereign reserve recycling anymore. It's atomized retail demand. Hundreds of millions of individual people in dozens of failing currency regimes choosing a dollar stablecoin over their local fiat because their local fiat is theft. Each one of those wallets is backed by short-dated treasuries. The old system needed Saudi Arabia. The new system needs everyone, one phone at a time. And the Clarity Act is the legal infrastructure that makes it possible. Now here's the part the architects don't seem to realize they're building. David Marcus ran PayPal, then built Libra at Facebook. He now runs Bitcoin and stablecoin-focused Lightspark. Last week he announced Grid Global Accounts, which is dollar accounts running on Bitcoin's Lightning rails that are Visa compatible in 100 countries. Listen to him close the loop.
They need to consider that stablecoins on other chains are like fiat payment networks. It's like, why do I integrate with like SEPA in Europe, and I'm fine with that, and I don't integrate with Solana for stablecoins? Makes no sense.
Yeah.
It was like an ideological, mental trap. And so I'm like, no, they're actually totally right. And then we went full tilt. So with Grid, we went like really full tilt. Like we support all the chains and all the stablecoins. And then we went even deeper with Grid Global Accounts because we made it compatible with all of the networks. And so now what that does is it gives you an account and a platform that you want to use because you can actually make your money move to wherever you want it to move. And the account that is the most connected ends up being a Bitcoin account, right? Because it's a Spark wallet. And so that's how all roads actually go to Bitcoin, is actually by leveraging the ability to offer an account that's both dollars and Bitcoin. And if you don't have the dollar, then Bitcoin is not as valuable. But like if you have dollar and Bitcoin, then gradually you'll use more and more Bitcoin. And if it lives on the same address, then...
So that's the reason that you think that stablecoin proliferation will increase Bitcoin adoption, just because, just from almost proximity, like they're in the same account. And at some point people might start playing around with Bitcoin, seeing what it can do, learning about it.
Exactly. So the open network that moves like the TCP/IP packets for money behind the scenes here is Bitcoin. And so that's amazing. Like it's a pretty profound thing that's happening right now. And not many people are actually really paying attention to that shift. But the fact that we're building on an open network that has that kind of reach right now is I think a profound turning point for Bitcoin.
Stablecoins on every chain are fiat payment rails. That's the punchline. Bitcoin is the open settlement layer underneath. The most connected dollar account in the world ends up being a Bitcoin account by default. People hold dollars and Bitcoin on the same app. Gradually, they touch Bitcoin. Then more. Let that sink in. The architecture being built to extend the dollar's life routes settlement through Bitcoin. The harder the architects push to scale stablecoin adoption, the more Bitcoin's network effects compound. They're paying with legislation, regulatory cover, and political capital to build Bitcoin's distribution channel, and they don't seem to see it. But the plumbing leads here regardless. The Clarity Act is about to clear the committee. Polymarket has it at 62% odds of being signed into law in 2026, with markup expected next week. And here's what I've been chewing on. The yield language was the biggest sticking point on the bill. It's been holding the whole thing up for months. With it cleared, the bill is now on the path to the president's desk. And I think the signing of the Clarity Act is the catalyst few are pricing in. Now, one of two things happens from here. Either the signing marks the start of the next leg up, and from where I sit, that's the most likely outcome. Or it gets front-run and the rally starts a week or two before the signature actually lands. Either way, those months of stalling on this bill very likely fed into the price weakness we just lived through for the last 6 months. It sure looked like TradFi stacking undercover, getting their products lined up before they sell stablecoins to retail. So they didn't need the price to go up. They needed price to stay still long enough to position. And now that window is about to close. Money that holds its value is becoming structurally necessary. The system that doesn't is being kept alive by every trick available. And the only money that can't be retired by decree is the money the US government just legislated a global distribution channel for. Do you think the architects of the Clarity Act actually understand they're building a Bitcoin on-ramp? Or is this a happy accident? And where do you stand on cycle dead or mid-cycle correction? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're still here, thanks for watching all the way to the end. Don't forget to smash the like button and share this with someone whose feed isn't connecting these dots. And of course, subscribe to Simply Bitcoin so you don't miss the next one. We'll see you on Thursday.